versions of the story, but the version of the story that I heard was with the Sfas Emes of Yehuda Leib of Gur, that he wasn't so accustomed to looking into mirrors. He didn't have a lot of mirrors around. Mirrors were a luxury item. He didn't have mirrors. So he's sitting with his Talmud in the Beis Medrash one day, and there happens to be that they put a mirror on the wall next to where they were sitting and learning. And the Sfas Emes looks over to the side and sees his reflection. He doesn't know that it's him. But he doesn't know that he's looking at himself. And he turns over to his Talmud and says, the person sitting next to us has so much Yirah Shamayim, I can't believe it. I've never seen more glowing awe of the divine coming out of a human being's face ever in my entire life. And the Talmud made the horrible mistake of saying, Rebbe, it's you. It's you. Which obviously made the Sfas Emes very, very perturbed. But this story, I believe, encapsulates the entire Iker of Chassidus as a discipline. As we know, the Rebbe wrote a long mimer describing the essence of Chassidus as opposed to all other areas of Torah. But perhaps another approach, which I think hones in on perhaps another angle of the Iker of Chassidus, is that when we look at the Torah, it's very easy to look at the Torah and see that we're looking at things that are outside of us. But what Chassidus reveals is that really what you're looking at is not something outside, but it's something inside. It's something inside. That is the entire discipline of Chassidus from the beginning to the end. You know, Carl Jung, which I'm a big fan of, the last book that he ever came out with was a book, he was Chassid in many ways. The last book that he ever wrote was not a book that he wrote, but a collection of interviews that he gave close to the end of his life. And in a fascinating line, he said, you should know there was a man named Dov Ber of Mezrich who they called the Great Maggid. He preempted my philosophy 100 years before I was born. He said this. Anyway, it's in a book called Jung Speaks. You could look it up. Anyway, be that as it may, so just as psychology was beginning to understand how all the visions and all the aspirations and all of the dreams that are seen outside of us are really things that are inside of us. So the person that brought the proto Chassidus into the world was without a doubt the Maharal of Prague. I consider myself a very close Talmud, as much as I possibly can be, of the Maharal. So if I can ask the friends here, my new friends and my old friends, to indulge me just for a moment, so I can give a quick skira of the Maharal. It's his Yoretzai today. And it's very matim, as Alex said before. It's very matim. What? The Maharal's Yoretzai is Chayol. As Alex was saying today, that it's the birthday of the Balatanya. It's very matim that it's the Yoretzai of the Maharal and the birthday of the Balatanya. So first of all, who was the Maharal? The Maharal had tremendous arichos yamim. Was born in the beginning of the 16th century and died at the beginning of the 17th century. He was born in 1512 and lived till 1609. A tremendous arichos yamim. He was a contemporary of the Arizal and the Ramah and the Beis Yosef and the Marshal. He was born before all of these people and died after them. He was born before all of them and died after them, with the exception of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef was born before him. And he saw tremendous upheaval in the world that he lived in. This was the time of the printing press. This was the time of the emerging nation state. This was the time of the Protestant Reformation. There were tremendous upheaval going on in the world. Also the scientific revolution, the beginnings of that were going on. The Maharal maintained close ties to the top scientists of his day, Tycho Brahe, Johann Kepler, the famous astronomers. They were all in contact with the Maharal, seeking out his wisdom in various areas. We know that the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who was a big promoter of the arts and sciences. You can go today to Prague. There's to this day in the center of Prague, of Old Prague, the Street of the Alchemists. What's the Street of the Alchemists? This guy Rudolph, he found all the greatest alchemists of the time, proto-chemistry, and brought them to Prague and said, listen, I'll support you. Just come to Prague and do your work here. There's a very famous mice of the Maharal when he was already in his 80s, well into his 80s, that this King Rudolph summoned him to the palace. He wanted to have a conversation with him. And the content of this meeting was kept very, very secret. Whatever it was they were talking about. No one knows what they were talking about. I found a very interesting record of this by a man named, a Rav named Rav David Gantz, who was a Talmud of both the Maharal and the Ramah. And he was a bit of a Renaissance man himself. He was both a Rav and an astronomer and a mathematician. Very, very interesting person. So Rav David Gan says the following about this meeting. V'ha'Kaisar Rudolphus berov chasdo, the Emperor Rudolph, in his tremendous kindness, shalach elav v'kara elav oso hagon, meaning the Maharal, he summoned him. The kiblu b'sever panim yafos, and he greeted him with tremendous honor. The diber iso pel pe kasher yidaber isha re'eo, he spoke to the Maharal like he would speak to a well-known friend. Umahus ve'echus advarim, but the content of their conversation, stumim v'chasumim v'ne'elamim heim. They were kept completely secret. No one knows what he was talking about. I have a theory what they were talking about, and my theory what they were talking about is was Rudolph's most beloved topic of alchemy, which was essentially how do you make inanimate objects come alive. That was his favorite topic, which is why the myth of the of the Golem of Prague, of the Maharal conjuring up this being, could coalesce around this character, because this is what was going on in Prague at that time. This was what people were after. A quick word about the Maharal as an Isha Halacha. The Maharal is known for being a mystic, but the truth is that his main occupation was as a Dayan. That was his main occupation, as a posek. And we have many of his halachic works. We have the Maharal, his Chedushim on Maseches Shabbos, and Maseches Eruvin, and Maseches Pesachim. Recently, the Maharal on Maseches Bava Metzia was published. Even more recently, his Shiurim on the Rif were published. There's many, many Sfarim that the Maharal wrote on halacha. Even in the Sfarim of the Maharal on Machshava, there are many sections which are purely halachic. Whether it's the section in Tiferes Yisrael, which talks about the kashrus of Sifrei Torah, or the halachic definition of Ner Chanukah, which he talks about in Ner Mitzvah. The Maharal is famous for promoting the idea that it's forbidden to use wax candles for Chanukah, because it's not a Ner. A Ner means a vessel with oil in it. Anything else is not a Ner. It's something else. It's not a Ner. So many people are machmir to not use wax candles because of this position of the Maharal. But the Maharal was primarily a posek. That was his main profession. In his spare time, Kavayachal, he wrote his Sifrei Machshava. What were the Sifrei Machshava of the Maharal? What was his main chiddush that he had brought to the world? So, as the Maharal himself says, the battle cry of the Maharal was the famous line, Kol divrei Torah in devarim be'etzem. All matters of Torah are matters of the essential. Meaning the Torah is never speaking about external, superficial things. It's always speaking about the most essential layer possible. So even if it seems that the Torah is describing external matters, really it's going to the absolute root of the thing. It's going to the absolute root of the thing. You know, in one of the few times that the Maharal quotes the Zohar HaKadosh in his Ksavim, this is just an example to highlight this point. The Maharal quotes the Zohar in Chazal and the Gemara and Kedushin talk about how certain behaviors, it's right, a person steps out of line, kilu maybe mabul la'olam. He'll bring a deluge to the world, just like the deluge in the time of Noach. So the Maharal quotes the Zohar, and the Zohar says, talking about yikavu amai mitachas hashamayim el makom echad, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, he formed all the waters into one place so there wouldn't be covering the whole earth in a chaotic mess. So the Zohar says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mechavein. He focused the waters into one place, meaning there's a lot of movement in the oceans. The oceans are very chaotic. For anyone who's gone deep sea fishing, they know it. It can get quite chaotic. But there's a boundary to the chaos, meaning it doesn't go all over the place. There's a boundary to the chaos. So too says the Maharal, though the Adam is a model of the entire world. And all the kochos of the Adam, they could be very chaotic. They could have tremendous exuberance to them. But there needs to be a boundary to that chaos. The human being is the microcosm of the world, which is this is extrapolating on an idea that we already find in the Rambam, in the Moreh Nevuchim, in Chelek Aleph, Perek Ayin Beis, as he says famously, Kol ha'olam kulahu ish echad. The world, the entire world collectively is one man, just one person. The world is a macrocosm, it's one person. And each person, each individual person, in turn, is a microcosm reflecting the entire world. You see that the entire Torah of the Maharal was to hyper focus and underscore this point, that everything we see externally in the Bria and everything we see conversely in the Torah itself is not describing external manners. Rather, they are describing the internal, most deep aspects of the human experience. And as the Alter Rebbe, he formulated this format in his Ma'amarim, in Torah Or and Likutei Torah. It's very orderly. It's very orderly, the Ma'amarim of the right of the Baal Tanya. As the Rebbe, he would call the Admor Mizaken, the Admor Azaken, what would he call him? The Posek. He was the Posek. Why was it? He was, right?
The Rav.
Right, the Rav, because he was very orderly, very methodical. So in the Ma'amarim of the Baal Tanya, he says, this is the idea as explained in the Zohar, and this is how the Arizal explains it more in the Olamos HaElyonim, Uben Nefesh Adam, and how this is how it manifests in the soul of the human being. Meaning there's the grand, the cosmic description of how this plays out, and then there's how it plays out within the human soul, within the human consciousness. This was the springboard, so to speak, for the whole Torah Chasidus. I'll just end off with a concrete example over here that is relevant to Inyana Diyoma. This is from the Maharal in his Chidushei Haggados on Maseches Avodah Zarah, and it has to do with Parshas HaShavua. The Babli in Avodah Zarah says the following: Taner Rabbanan, Mi Yitein V'Haya Levavam Zeh. This is at Har Sinai. We spoke about before. Moshe comes down, he breaks the luchos because the Jewish people weren't able to sustain the weight of the majesty of Har Sinai. And God says to Moshe, Mi yitein v'haya levavam zeh. Who will give it, like halavai, it should be that the Jewish people should maintain their awe and trepidation that they have here at Sinai forever. So, Amar lehem Moshe Yisrael. So Moshe at that point said to the Jewish people, Kfuyei tuva b'nei kfuyei tuva, you ingrateful people. B'shah she'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, mi yitein v'haya levavam zeh. At that moment that God said, halavai, that your hearts should be in this state of awe and trepidation always, haya lehem lomar, you should have responded, tein ata. You should have immediately said, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want us to maintain this state forever? So make it so. Give us, refine our hearts that we should be in this constant state of awe and trepidation before you. But they didn't. They didn't ask that. They just overheard the statement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They said, okay, that's nice. Weiter. They didn't respond in any way. Af Moshe Rabbeinu. Similarly, Moshe, our master, lo ramzalem liYisrael. He did not give this tochacha, this rebuke of the Jewish people, ela la'achar 40 shana. After 40 years. At the very, very end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, he rebukes them about this point. Meaning, the fact that the Jewish people did not ask for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to refine their hearts. They didn't ask that. They didn't make that request. So says Moshe, he rebukes them at the end of his life. V'lo nosan Hashem lochem leiv lodas ad hayom hazeh. God has not given you a heart to know until this very day. Shma mina, says the Gemara, lo koi inish adaita derabe ad arba'in shnin. It takes a person 40 years to sit with a master until he can, be fully aware of the master's teachings. So says the Maharal the following. You don't need to read it inside, just to give, just to paraphrase the Maharal's teachings on this. The Maharal says, what is the essence of tochacha? The essence of proper tochacha is being able to identify where a person is holding, where a person's level is, and how they are not oriented to their possible output according to that state of being. That's what tochacha means. At the moment of Har Sinai, meaning the very beginning of the story, this is the first year, this is literally a month and a half after they left Mitzrayim, a month and a half out of slavery. The Jewish people had the opportunity to request from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give us new hearts, refine our essence, make us in this permanent state of awe and trepidation of the divine. But they didn't make that request. Why didn't they make that request? Because they didn't have the capacity to make such a request. They didn't have the wherewithal, the sensitivity to even know that such a thing was valuable. Okay, so they heard God speak and say, yes, it would be good if they maintained this level of Yiras Shamayim forever. But they didn't have anything to do with that. They couldn't do anything with it because they weren't in a place where they were able to do anything. It took them 40 years until Moshe Rabbeinu intuited that the people were finally at a level where he could give them tochacha. He could give them tochacha. He say, make sure that the next high that you obtain, the next wave, so to speak, that you get to ride, make sure that you make that permanent. Lo nasan Hashem lachem leiv lo das ad hayom hazeh. God only gave you a heart to be aware of this now. And this is the final lesson of Moshe Rabbeinu as he's leaving the world. This is what he wants us to take with us. Whenever you are able to achieve such a high, akin to the experience of Sinai, make sure that you make it as permanent as possible. Because they're fleeting. They don't happen all the time. As the Rambam famously says in his Hakdama to the Moreh, that our experience of Elokus is like a person wandering through the woods in pitch black. and he has no idea where he's going, and he's, feeling out to see if he could, touch a tree or touch a bush or something in order to make his way. He's completely oblivious to everything around him. And then at that moment, there's a bolt of lightning, and it illuminates everything. And there's one instant where everything is completely clear. Everything is completely clear. He can see everything in front of him. But then after that one moment, it goes pitch black again. He says says the Rambam, that's our experience of life. Our experience of life is that we're wandering through abject darkness. There's absolutely no hope to see anything. Everything is vayamesh choshech. It's like palpable darkness. But we merit to have a momentary flashes of light where everything achieves complete and total clarity. And the goal is to be able to take those moments, and on the basis of those moments to navigate our way weiter. And that's the final message of Moshe Rabbeinu. The next time you see that flash of clarity, make sure that you make it as permanent as you possibly can.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.